And we are so pleased to be here speaking with you about building Salesforce well architected. And I am here with the entire Salesforce Architect Relations team, which is so amazing. And why don't we go down the line, just quick intros, your name, and sort of what you do on the team. So my name is Susanna Plaisted, and I am an architect evangelist in Architect Relations.
My name is Zane Turner, and I have the honor of leading this fantastic team of Architect Relations folks.
I'm Tom Leddy, and I'm an architect evangelist.
I'm Marissa Love, and I work on market programs and strategy for Architect Relations.
Hey everybody, I'm Mark Braga. I've been with Salesforce 7 years. I'm on this team, and I manage mainly on products and tools, a lot of the diagrams, all the stuff you see in architect.salesforce.com. And this fantastic team promotes all of it.
Okay, so we're here today to talk a little bit about well architected. No surprise from the slide. Who here, raise your hand if you've heard of well architected before stepping into this room. Okay, cool. Who's actually read some of well architected? Same hands, that's good. Good sign. If you haven't heard of well architected yet, that's fine, because we're going to be not only talking about building it, but we're going to give you a bit of a crash course into the main aspects of well architected as well. So why don't we go ahead and, come on in. We're just getting started with a popular slide. Don't miss it. So just your friendly reminder to make your purchasing decisions based on what is currently available in our product today. And now that we have that housekeeping out of the way, I was remiss at first thanking our sponsors. So let me flip back to the slide. Our amazing sponsors who allow us to have events like this. We couldn't do it without them. So. Well architected. If you have not heard of Salesforce well architected, you might have still heard of the concept of a well architected framework. And that's because this is not a net new thing. This is not a concept that was invented by Salesforce. It is a standard that exists across the industry in a number of different cloud substrates. So AWS sort of led the way with AWS well architected framework. Azure followed suit, and Google Cloud Platform has their flavor of well architected as well. And what all of these frameworks sort of have in common is that they describe how to best design and deploy workloads across whatever infrastructure as a service provider they are aligned to. And because all of those companies have sort of similar concerns, they're also focused on how to optimize spend when you're building architectures on those tools. And all of these frameworks sort of have similarities. They have a number of maybe like 4 to 5 what are referred to as pillars. And the meat of the well-architected frameworks are white papers that describe concepts that you should be concerned about when architecting those platforms. And a lot of these frameworks also have tools, things like auditing capabilities and maturity scorecards, and again, they're all anchored to that single cloud substrate. When our team started talking about well-architected, we realized that if we're going to consider a Salesforce well-architected framework, it needed to be different because the way that you build and architect on Salesforce is inherently different. So our approach looks a little bit like this. So what we help you do with Salesforce well architected is to design and roadmap healthy solutions that are going to last. And because we're not building on an infrastructure as a service provider, we don't need to think about where you're optimizing your spend so much, but you do need to think about where you're optimizing where you spend your time. Because it's incredibly valuable as an architect, especially because this promise of Salesforce, which is you can deliver faster and more agile, that means that you have to be really smart about how you're prioritizing things. And how we do this with Salesforce well architected today is through a series of white papers that are available on architect.salesforce.com. And we have tools that are coming out next. And we're in the process, actually, after this, we're going to be talking about our next year's plan. So we'd love to get some feedback from you once you hear more about this framework, about what you want to see as far as tooling. Because we wanted to build the concept first, and then make sure we're actually delivering tools that are valuable to you. And the technical scope of well architected today is the Salesforce Customer 360 platform. So when we say that, we mean core, or what we sort of internally refer to as core Salesforce platform and near core, so things like sales, service, soon marketing, and commerce as well. We are not tackling the animals of Tableau and Slack and MuleSoft just yet, but more to come on that. Zane, do you want to talk about the framework?
Thank you, Susanna. I'm delighted to talk about. So this is our V1 release in a snapshot, a little visual here if you want to see. So when we talk about that framework, we have 3 pillars: trusted, easy, adaptable. And then under those pillars, we have these sort of subtopics, and there are 8 of them total. And this is reflecting what Susanna was talking about, of when we think about Salesforce well-architected, what customers are using Salesforce for is to, of course, run their business. And so what you're trying to do with a well-architected solution is bring these certain qualities, what health looks like, to the business. And so that's how we've organized this framework, is that you should be able to be bringing the capability of being trusted to the enterprise, that the solutions are easy to use, and we're going to talk more about what that means, and that you're bringing adaptability into the enterprise. And so that's the orientation of this whole framework, is about the qualities that you should be bringing to business through your architectural choices. And I think with that, we have the URL where you can find it, but yes, so you're here, we promised some lessons learned. So what we're going to do is step through the framework, and then also look at some of the things that surprised us as we built it. Because we built well-architected with many of you in this room, and we'll continue to build it with you, but we also built it with a lot of experts that are working on our own products, supporting our customers, implementing some of our most complex use cases, and the teams that are owning our products and the product roadmaps. And as we worked with all of these different teams, several surprising things came out. We talked about what should customers be doing with their products, what are they doing with their products. And one of our first surprises was the whole idea of well-architected is built on a set of assumptions that you know the basics of how our platform behaves, and that there are certain fundamental truths about our platform that circumscribe your architectural choices. So we had to build an entire new set of resources that aren't even part of well-architected, that are sort of architecture basics, and you can find them on our website. And it's things that you, if you are not that familiar with Salesforce, might not be intuitive, of what is a transaction, and why do they even matter, and how are transactions instantiated and calculated, and all of the things that you may not know intuitively. That's a real thing you've got to design around, and you see it then reflected throughout well-architected. Transactionality is super important. Or the fact that because of architectural decisions we as a company have made, metadata and data are different entities, literally different entities in our own core architecture. And Tom worked on revising the platform multi-tenant white paper that was written many, many, many years ago. It's now updated, it's got Hyperforce in it, because it's great work Tom did along with a gentleman named Steve Bobrowski. And it goes into exactly why that decision was made and what it means. But for you architects, that also then has ramifications for your own architecture, and you're going to see some of those coming out in the pillars. And then at the end, of course, everyone who's built on our platform knows platform APIs, there are many of them. There are myriad, versioning matters, and that's a little bit counterintuitive maybe for people that are not quite used to the way that our multi-tenant metadata-driven platform behaves. So we had to create a whole basics doc to even help make it so that we could have a well-architected doc. So I think that's our first lesson learned. And now I think we're going to go through the pillars, and I'll hand it back to Susanna.
Okay, so now that we have the basics under wrap, let's go ahead and talk about the first pillar of the well-architected framework, which is trusted. And these pillars and all of the sub-considerations are actually in priority order. So it's no coincidence that trusted is first, because at Salesforce, trust is our number one priority. So with trusted, what we mean specifically is that trusted solutions protect the business and they protect your stakeholders. And you can see that there's 3 considerations under trust that describe what a trusted solution should do. So a trusted solution should be secure, meaning that it should control access and protect data through things like user security, session security, and data security. And a trusted solution should also be compliant, so it should adhere to legal guidelines like the GDPR. But it doesn't just stop there with legal adherence. You should also be abiding by ethical standards as a competitive business advantage. There's lots of businesses that are now thinking about how ethical they are and how it aligns to their bottom line. So that's incredibly important right now. And also accessibility, so making sure whatever you build can be used by anyone with different abilities. And then rounding out the trusted pillar is reliable. So solutions that are reliable operate dependably no matter what scale of transactions or the volume of users or the volume of data. And they do that by thinking about things like availability, the uptime of a solution, which is not just a Salesforce consideration. We know that when we introduce change into the platform, either customizations or the number of records, availability can change. And it's actually a shared responsibility between our folks who are building the platform and Salesforce itself. And then performance and scalability, probably not new concerns if you're an architect. Those are things that you're thinking about every day, but they're incredibly important to build a reliable solution. So this is the basics for Trusted, but let's talk about what we learned and some surprises that we ran into when building this Trusted pillar.
Yeah, so if you think about authentication versus authorization, and I know I can tell you early in my career I've done this, I bet a lot of people in here have done this at least once. Created one user called integration user, and you use it to handle all of the records that are created by any integration in the eye. I see a few hands back there. And the idea, when you do that, then you end up with, we don't know who really owns this record, and then you can end up with data skew because you've got one user owning tens of thousands of records. So the idea of creating users based on individuals, not personas, and making sure that you have that individual ownership. But then when you think about authorization, or think about what users can access, you want to do that in terms of personas, not individuals. And what you think about here is, we've all seen orgs, maybe you haven't done this, but I'm sure we've all seen orgs that we've come into that have a bunch of users with individual profiles, and all of their security is controlled one-off based on their profile. So the idea here is you want to use permission sets and not profiles like that, so you can assign permission sets to multiple users and think about it more of what personas need to have this access. And then when we think about compliance, set your, or organization-wide defaults were the next one. So setting your OWDs to public read, and actually Louise, who's not here now, but did a great discussion about this earlier today. The idea is you can overcomplicate your security model if you set everything to private right out of the box by default, at least for internally. For external OWDs, it's a different case. But the idea is you set everything to read, public read only, unless you're dealing with really sensitive data, in which case obviously use private and use your best judgment there, but it'll actually help simplify your sharing model. And then lastly, we had classifying triggers in terms of people, process, and technology. So when you think about any kind of critical failure that can happen in your org, it probably, initially it would look like a technical issue, but there could be a root cause under that is related to a business process issue that needs to be changed so that you don't keep having that failure even once you fix the technical piece of it. And you could also have a policy that you need to change, for example. But there's also a technical aspect to that too, of maybe you do need to introduce redundancies, especially if you're working in a heavily regulated industry. So those are some lessons learned from Trusted, and let's talk about Easy.
The OWD piece is a little controversial, so we said we were going to talk about things that were controversial. That's one, so we'd love to talk more about that. Yeah.
We have a little bit of time. The reason that we even recommended that OWD is there's the sharing implications that Tom talked about, overcomplicating and over-engineering, and Easy, we're about to talk to that. That's the violation of that pillar. But even within Secure, there is a significant performance trade-off for doing that and all of those recalculations. So that's why the recommendation is, unless you have a business reason where the risk of that privacy being heightened or lowered outweighs all of the subsequent performance hits you're going to take as you then start seeing scale, that's that trade-off you need to consider, right? And so that's why the default recommendation is, unless you have a compelling business reason for private, public read-only is where you should start.
And I love, for me, when I first heard that takeaway was, be intentional about the choices that you're making. Don't just by default say, well, it's private, because that's, I don't want to have any risk, anything happening down the road. So I think it's important to make those decisions intentionally. And we'll talk more about intentionality in a little bit, but right now, let's talk about the Easy pillar, which, seeing this right away, you might be like, my job as a Salesforce architect isn't easy. And that's true. We're not saying that your job should necessarily be easy. We want to help it be easier. We want to make tools that make your life better. But what we're saying with Easy is that you should do the hard work. You should make those tough decisions so that your system is easy for your users to use. And it's easy for those who either work with you today or might replace you tomorrow, that it's easy for those people to maintain what you've built over time. And to do that, there are 3 considerations here. So easy solutions are simple, which means that they follow the most direct path in engineering, that you're using those out-of-the-box clicks capabilities when you can, instead of always writing Apex because that's what you're most comfortable doing. Also thinking about things like readability and maintainability, and also intentionality, so making a decision around how can I make this as simple as possible for my users, for myself, for those that follow me. Easy solutions are also automated. And this doesn't mean automating all the things just because Salesforce can let you automate all the things. It means automating things that help your business meet their goals and their objectives faster. And that might sometimes not mean automating something that happens like once a month, once a year. You focus on the things that are, again, prioritizing your time. And you do that through making sure there's clear logic, so leaning out your processes before you automate some process that really needs to be addressed first before you automate a bad process. It also means thinking about things like data integrity in your processes, and also ultimately that business value of making sure you're automating something that's going to matter to your users. And then finally, rounding out easy is engaging. So this doesn't mean necessarily putting confetti on screens when someone is gonna not appreciate that, and that's, a lot of the time. But it means that your solutions should delight users. So that might look like making it easier for them to do their jobs, having a form that only has exactly what needs to be entered to do the job and not a bunch of extra stuff where they're gonna waste their time. And it also means making sure that your users are driven to use the product in the way that it's designed. So encouraging them to make the right choices so they're not skipping things and entering bad data. It means encouraging them and rewarding them for following the application's expected behavior. What did we learn with Easy, Tom?
All right, so with Easy, we learned, first of all, documentation. Without good documentation, you can architect the best org ever, and then you're going to walk off the project and you're going to be getting calls every 5 minutes from either another architect who took over, a delivery team, whoever it is that's going to want to know what you did because they don't understand your org. So having that documentation and making sure you've got clear design standards, making sure you've got roadmaps for future releases, all of that stuff is important. It's not directly architecting something in the system, but it's just as important as the design work that you're doing. Automation. So using SOSL for searches and using SOCL for data operations. And under the hood, and this is what kind of Zane had talked about earlier, whenever you execute a SOCL statement, the platform is actually treating it as if you are getting ready to write to the database, and it adds a bunch of extra overhead that could lead to performance issues. So
It does, not
yeah,
good.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So yes. So I mean, we don't see SOSL used as frequently because architects are more comfortable, and developers are a lot more comfortable with SOCL. But knowing to use the right tool for the right job and knowing how to use both of them is extremely important. And the next one is one of my favorites because there's still a lot of our documentation that still contradicts this, but the recommendation of one automation per object is actually not necessarily correct. And it probably was a few years ago when we were relying on process builders and workflow rules, but the reality is, first of all, the platform has its own order of execution of things that are going on in the background whenever you are executing automations. But the other thing is we have a bunch of new tools. So when you look at things like Flow Orchestrator or being able to prioritize your record triggered automations, it's not really, you shouldn't limit yourself to one automation per object because then you risk creating a big monolith flow that does like 27 different things versus creating a bunch of smaller bite-sized automations and then using the orchestration tools the right way to orchestrate those automations. And then lastly, we had recognition and rewards, and Susanna kind of mentioned this. You don't necessarily need to show confetti every time somebody saves a record, but one of the things when we were putting together the whole engaging chapter, you wonder as an architect, well, isn't this something like a UX designer should care about? Like, why do I even need to think about this as an architect? But the truth is that if you are not designing a system that users want to use, what they're going to end up doing is trying to rush through it, and they're going to make a bunch of mistakes, and then you're going to end up with data quality issues because you didn't design an engaging system that is actually helping users understand how the work that they're doing is contributing to the KPIs of the organization, and that they feel good about using. So those are some of the learnings from that.
Folks aren't using what you build, right? Even if it's the most elegant, beautiful, well-architected solution, like, have you been successful as an architect? I think that's an important thing to think about. And just at one point on documentation, I like to say, like, this doesn't mean just doing the bare minimum on documentation or saying, like, yes, I added some documentation. It means having things, not just documenting what you've built, but why you've built it. So things like decision records. This is one of my new favorite things to talk about. So making sure that if you went through a bunch of different solution considerations and chose something, that someone isn't doing that whole process again in 2 years and arriving at the very same solution and wasting resources and time again.
Hallelujah.
Awesome. So, rounding out the 3 pillars of well-architected is adaptable. And when we say adaptable, we mean that solutions should evolve with the business. And Salesforce specifically, this is incredibly important, right? That's why our businesses and our companies have invested in Salesforce, because they've bought into the stream of having an application that's easy to adapt as the business changes. So as architects, we need to help bring that vision to life. And we can do that by really focusing in on two key elements. So the first one is resilience. And resilient solutions handle change well. So you can do that in a number of ways. Some of them are monitoring, so making sure that you know what's going on with your system, that if someone deletes a pick list value or corrupts data, that you are using the right tools to be proactive about that and not being surprised by those issues. Also, continuity. So business continuity plans, or BCPs, making sure that you have one, that you've practiced whatever processes you've set in place should an incident happen. And then finally, application lifecycle management. So making sure that you're deploying your changes using the most stable tool that you have available, whether that's unlock packages, whether maybe you're just starting to dip your feet into the source control world, and maybe not, well, I won't steal Tom's thunder, so I'll leave it at that for now. But the final consideration on all of well-architected is composable. So composable solutions adjust quickly and with greater stability, and they do this by separating concerns. So that means not tightly coupling your changes to a particular org. So not thinking about, like, yes, I have my UAT and staging sandbox, and I rely heavily on all the data and all of the metadata and all the configuration in there. We want to slowly move away from that paradigm. Also thinking about things like packageability. So how are you going to structure the functional units in your application so that you can make changes, so that you can maybe adapt a certain application for one business unit without disrupting another business unit, because they don't need that change. They don't care about that. You need to be able to swap in these composable units. But what have we learned, Tom, while we were building this?
So we learned, actually, you had started to talk about this. Stop using change sets to migrate changes. There are a lot of tools that are available. There's some third-party tools, but there's also DevOps Center. And the idea is, whatever you're doing, make sure you're using source control, and you're using like a central repository. You're not making just your production system be the source of truth for all of the changes that you made, and then just refreshing sandboxes when you need to make updates. And then also, composability. So we talked about packageability, and if you look at this diagram up here, we've kind of got the structure of how you're building functional units that align to business capabilities, and then there's an interoperability layer of how do those things, not just what do they do, but how do they work together, and how do they interact with each other in a way that is still loosely coupled. So you don't want to create a bunch of dependencies, and then on top of that, it's now how do you package those things up so that, like Susanna said, you can move things into an org that has multiple business units, so that one business unit won't be affected by what the other one's doing. Or if you've got a multi-org strategy and you need to have similar functionality available in more than one org, you can have a way to deploy packages into multiple orgs and introduce that same functionality without having to duplicate your efforts in a bunch of different places.
And one piece about this composability as a whole is that we talked about it being in priority order, and the concerns that are in composable are also some of the most advanced concepts, just transparently. I think it's stuff that sounds very theoretical and you'd love to do it, but in practice, there's a whole long journey to get there. And another powerful thing about this visual is that when we were building it and working with stakeholders like the team from MuleSoft, we were working very closely with them because composability is a super important concept for them, and we wanted to have sort of a seamless bridge as we build more things together. But even just the paradigm of this isn't just about packaging and multi-org strategy. This is within your org if you want to adopt a paradigm with multiple kinds of automation tools. Well, then thinking about building this out as, okay, if we can actually get good, coherent functional units, and we start getting predictable design patterns and ways that we have things communicate with each other, you start thinking about API-like communication within your org, that opens up new ways of handling state, so that then a flow can hand off to Apex and vice versa much more gracefully. And that's how you get that beautiful interoperable automation. But it's complex to get there, and it takes the rigor of thinking about these units in that way. And that's how you break down the monolith even within an org and transform how flexible a single org is. And that's really the power of this paradigm.
Okay, so you've walked through with us today all of Well Architected and learned a little bit about how we built it. But the actual white papers have a lot of information in them. So we gave you the cliff notes for now. So one of the next things you can do is explore architect.salesforce.com. But there's some other things that you can do as well. So you might have heard of Salesforce Well Architected workshops. They are an opportunity to get hands-on with scenarios, real-life scenarios, where you can practice applying the concepts of security, of composability, in a simulated real-world situation. And you get to do this on a whiteboard with teams. It's fun, and you get to explore different ideas and bounce ideas off one another. And we're going to be doing some of these tomorrow at Your Architectin. Is anyone joining us at Your Architectin? Okay, awesome. We'll see you there. And if you're not, I believe that there are like 3 tickets left. So if you want to join us for a well-architected workshop, you can come see us afterwards. We'll tell you how to register. And you can also join us at TDX, because we're going to be running these workshops again at TrailheadDX. And we have already started the process of figuring out a way to help give you the tools in your community to run these workshops without traveling to San Francisco or without going to Your Architectin. So be on the lookout for those resources. Tom and I, that's one of our projects coming up in December to really focus on that, because we want to enable you to run these workshops for your coworkers, for your community, and for anyone that might be interested. And I think with that, thank you. Yeah. So I think we have a little bit of time to do a couple questions and answers. If anyone has any questions or feedback, we would love to hear it. Yeah, do you want to, I'll repeat it for the recording, but do you just want to speak up?
Okay, I have a question. So we obviously every year must be well documented, but once we have Jira and once we have GitHub, what would be the best way to create documentation without being exhaustive, without taking too much time, adding done with Jira?
So question around documentation, how do you do it without being redundant when you're already documenting stuff in Jira, already in GitHub? What are some tools that might make your job easier? So one that I can think of is elements.cloud if you're looking for a way to put documentation sort of in. One thing I'm pretty passionate about is making sure that your documentation is there when you need it and easily accessible. And I think elements.cloud is an app exchange application that allows you to document your fields and your classes and other things, and then surface them in the UI with like a little question mark. I think it's really powerful. It also lets you do some like business mapping of why was your solution designed the way it is. So it's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah, it's going to work with our diagramming framework pretty soon too. So.
Yes, question was, we didn't talk at all about testing and how, that seems like a thing that might be important. And we actually do go into testing in that resilience chapter in several different places, but especially in ALM. But we do talk about it in the resilience chapter as well. It's you don't know how to if you can handle change unless you can test against those changes.
Also, how to really well track and test so that you test and maintainable and
Yeah, so we don't go into the depths of like teaching you. So the comment was about code, structuring your tests to be, or your tests at all, not just code, but all your tests to be well maintainable and all those good things. We do go into more about the kinds of tests you want and the resiliency you need within your tests. So we do talk about that.
Okay, for example, even like when you have flows that are mentioned, you have like ways of the world I'm coming, like deadline implementations, like how that will fit in on that as well.
Yeah, that's something kind of like you said. We talk about the types of tests and like a testing strategy that you should have, but some of the specific details about how to test previous versions of that we don't get that granular.
And the answer is your tests are not your documentation. Your tests are your tests. So sorry, congratulations. Welcome to a whole other dimension of work.
There's a question back there.
Well, I have a question. When you talked about breaking the monolithic into multiple modules, is there a guide or a document that shows how to do it step by step? Or what are the priorities?
There's a series of blogs I wrote a number of years ago that about brute forcing your way through it, and to my knowledge, are still the one that people are using. I'm so sorry that that's the case. I think there are some tools. I know there are people here right now that are working on tools. Someone sitting right behind you. In fact, this is serendipity, not planned. Y'all should talk after the session because there are community members that are building tools to try to help you do that. There's no native capability to do that right now. You have to understand the dependencies in our platform. But yeah, you two should meet each other and do besties.
Yeah, I think at a certain point though, too, you're going to be able to automate that to an extent, but you're still going to have to understand your own logic of your automations and where it makes sense to modularize them. So there are tools that are probably available or becoming available that'll help with some of the technical aspects of that, but you're not going to be able to get around actually thinking through your automations and how you want to break them up too. Well,
So you already mentioned that actually you're bringing your diagrams and your style to a few existing tools, which is awesome. But I'm a big fan, for example, of Draw.io because also it has a free version, it integrates with some others. So can you make me very happy and tell me that?
I don't know specifically what that is.
No, it is not. We're not gonna lie. No, it is not. But so Mark and Marissa, this is their world of looking at how we're partnering, and so we are actively looking at who are the next partners that we need to be onboarding and why. So that feedback helps, but it transparently is not on our roadmap because there is no roadmap right now.
Just to add, the reason why there isn't any roadmap on getting new partners onboarded is because we're focusing our time on making sure that the actual kit of parts, the icons and the shapes, are stepped up before we find a way to engage more partners, because we know that you need more. We've heard loud and clear, you need more shapes, you need a little more customization there. So that is where we're spending our time instead of.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank